Picture a civilization or a society. Now, what do you see? You might see buildings and people and food and even technology. What you don't see is the foundation of it, education. Now, education has been with us since before the agricultural revolution, and we've seen it in many different ways. We've seen it through oral history, through literacy. But one thing is certain: education shapes our society, and it shapes how our society develops. Take the demographic transition model, for example. Without education, we would never have the innovative ability to create new advanced medicines and new methods of production in order to advance into even stage 2. Now you're probably thinking, why do I need to hear about education? Schools are closed, big deal. But it is now more than ever that we have to discuss this, because this is a crucial part of our society, and we have to examine its effects on not just the United States, but the world. Now, here in the United States, we're lucky. We have free government-provided education. Now, a person in the Democratic Republic of the Congo would not be afforded this, would not get this opportunity. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, there is no free education. Everything has to be paid for, and most families can't afford that. And so the DRC has one of the highest literacy rates in the world. If we examine education historically, we would see that standardized education was almost exclusively provided to the rich and the nobility of a society, and this cemented their position as the head of their respective civilizations. Now, in this modern day and age, we have access to education, and so we have access to more opportunities in our area, in our environment. Now, these days, I spend most of my time baking, like this chocolate chip cookie here. It's very good. Now, I also spend a lot of my time annoying the crap out of my little brother, especially when he does his homework. And I brought some of his homework right here. Now, it says here, look in your closet. That's step 1. Draw or write a list of things you find there. Ooh, wow. And make at least 2 groups. Tell someone why these things belong together. Now that seems extremely challenging and strenuous. Now my little brother is in grade 5, and if the sum total of his education is finding 2 numbers that add to 2.8, then we have a serious problem. And if this is how it is in a modern developed society, then I can't even imagine how terrible it would be in an LDC. So, how do you like school?
It's good.
Yeah?
Yeah?
Do you prefer online school or real school?
Real school.
Why is that?
Because in real school, I actually get to see people. There's people there, actually. And I'm not at home all the time.
All right. What's your favorite subject?
Language arts.
Language arts. And do you believe that school is challenging for you?
No, because I already know all the questions it gives me.
Now, I believe that a lot of these educational problems is simply due to standardization. Due to globalization and space-time compression, we are far more connected. And the bureaucracy of the education system has never been larger. And as a result of this, most places, in fact, have standardized education. And as a result, many students just can't keep up with the things that are being taught. One of the things that standardization does not take into account is population distribution. Now, we are near DC, and we are a large suburban area. And so naturally, there would be a lot more schools. And so in order for them to be accessible, there are also a lot more hospitals and daycares. Now, in largely rural areas, they have widely dispersed schools because they have a dispersed population. Both follow the same curriculum, and yet there is a massive discrepancy between grades. So that's why studies show that high schools in rural and urban settings do far worse. Take the state of Kansas, for example. Now here's a map of Kansas and its high schools. Now we see that there are far more high schools in the east compared to the west. In fact, in Wichita alone, there are 8 compared to all of the high schools in the west, which total to 5. Now, we see this because in the west, there's a far greater dispersal of the population. Now, what does this tell us? Well, it tells us that in suburban areas, there are far more resources allocated. And the curriculums are based around areas with more concentrated populations. Unlike areas with dispersed populations, which still undergo the same curriculums. Education is also closely linked to culture, especially folk culture. In most folk cultures, education isn't even synonymous with culture. Education allows you to learn your history, your religion, your language, everything that keeps you interconnected. Education mainly differs between pop culture and folk culture because pop culture is possibilistic while folk culture is deterministic. And so education in pop culture deals with more universal themes, while folk culture deals with the immediate environment and the society in which you live. Now, I'm not saying that one is better than the other, but pop culture education works better in pop culture, and folk culture education works better in folk culture. Now, this is not seen in many developed and undeveloped countries who try to push pop culture education on every single society. Now, one main example of this is the residential school system in Canada. Now, as of 1867, through the Indian Act, passed by Sir John A. Macdonald, Native Americans in Canada were forcibly relocated into residential schools. Here they would be taught what the Canadians believed would be a standard Christian education. Now, terrible things happened in those residential schools. And these Native Americans were completely distanced from their culture and their language. And as a result of this, there was a massive increase in poverty, in violence, and in general lack of well-being in the Native American communities. The Canadian government thought they were helping the Native Americans, but in reality, what they didn't realize was that the Native American education system worked better for the Native American societies. And this is just another example of a federal government imposing various universal regulations on differing communities and ethnic groups. The idea that all cultures in society are equal and the same is the same as saying that all students are equal and the same. When in fact, all of these places and all of these societies and ethnicities have different strengths and weaknesses, and they require different things. If you're living in a region of the world with no plants and no flora of any type, then agriculture just might not be your thing. And that is why education systems should be more individualistic and should treat people by their strengths instead of just going by an overall curriculum. This is far worse now because of the coronavirus pandemic. These days we are seeing students who live in more impoverished countries like Chad and the DRC, and students who live in less populated areas like Western Kansas, and even students who live in remote folk cultures that are being hurt the most. These people have nothing to do and nowhere to go. Without their education, without their connection to their culture and to their language, there's no upward mobility, and people all over the world are being hurt by government regulations that they have nothing to do with. So relatively speaking, my experience with the coronavirus is fairly easy. I don't have to worry about what I'm going to do in the future, or if the education system is going to fail me, or if I'm even going to make enough money to support myself. But that's not the case for millions of people across the world. Now, I had the pleasure of interviewing my uncle, who is a teacher up in Baker Lake, Nunavut, a small town in the Arctic Circle that was originally a trading post built by the Hudson Bay Company in 1914. It has a population of a little over 2,000, and it has a singular high school. Baker Lake has no paved roads, and the only way to get in is by taking a plane from Winnipeg, Manitoba. My uncle, David Applebaum, has taught in many places, including Bella Bella in British Columbia, Salouet in Quebec, numerous islands in Japan, and Majuro in the Marshall Islands. I interviewed him to get a better understanding of what it's like to teach in a remote, full culture environment. How does teaching in Baker Lake differ from your other teaching jobs, and how does it differ from teaching in general?
All right, well, I'll start off by saying that every time I teach in a new place, the teachers always tell me that, oh, teaching here is very different from other places. And so every place is always different from other places. And it's true, each place is unique and each place is different, but ultimately the essence of it is the same, where there's students who have issues and there's an education that we're trying to do, and the issues are different from place to place and the education is different from place to place, and each place is unique. But it gets to the point where if each place is unique, each place is actually dealing with the same issues. So teaching in Baker Lake has its own issues. There's things that are unique to Baker Lake, but there are also very universal things found around the world in Baker Lake. And high school students, I hear a lot of the teachers say, "Oh yeah, well that's how it is in Baker Lake. These kids are dealing with all this stuff." And I say, yeah, well, kids are dealing with the same stuff in Ottawa. They're dealing with the same stuff in Virginia. They're dealing with the same stuff in New Zealand. High school students are going through what high school students go through.
All right. And can you describe some ways that you try to engage your students then?
Yeah, I think it's really important for students to be learning things that they find interesting to themselves. We follow here in Nunavut, unfortunately, we're following the Alberta curriculum. And the Alberta curriculum, is designed for students in Alberta. It is not designed for students who live in the north. And so, for example, there's a lot of, you do readings about trees and forests and gardening. And this is not something that students here can relate to in any way, shape, or form. And the people, the pictures that they're looking at they don't see themselves in these pictures. They don't see themselves in the stories. And so I think it's really important that we bring in to the curriculum, even though it's not officially sanctioned by Alberta, we bring in cultural relevance, we bring in local relevance, we bring in elders to talk to the students and talk about Inuit history, talk about the residential school's effect on the community, talk about the abuse that exists in Nunavut communities because of the residential schools. And there's a lot of writing. There are a lot of books, there are a lot of stories by Inuit authors, with Inuit children in it. And I think it's really important that is something that the students can see when they're reading. For example, there's the first book that was ever written by an Inuit author. This is called, I don't know if you can see it. This is called Harpoon of the Hunter. Yeah. Really, I think this book, to be honest, I think this book should be read in all Canadian schools, and maybe all schools in the world. But this book is about a traditional hunter lifestyle. It doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately, but many of our students go out on the land. They know about hunting. They've killed a caribou. They know what that's like. And so bringing that sort of thing into the classroom is much more important than reading about Charles Dickens or Thomas Hardy or even Shakespeare. I mean, we were supposed to do Shakespeare every term, and students around the world are supposed to read Shakespeare, and they roll their eyes like, "Oh, Shakespeare." And I'm a big proponent of Shakespeare. I think Shakespeare is great, but I think that there's more priorities for these students than learning Shakespeare. And there are so many books and so many good authors that they could read that they can see themselves in.
So, like, what you're saying is there should be like a greater stress on their folk culture, like in comparison to like a nationwide curriculum. Interesting.
Absolutely. And when I lived in Marshall Islands, for example, we did a lot of readings about the Marshall Islands. We were following an American curriculum when we were in the Marshall Islands, and we were reading John Steinbeck and reading, To Kill a Mockingbird, like the standard books that you read in high school. And those are important. I think those are important books. But it doesn't mean we can't bring in local content and make it relevant. And I think that's really important. Now, that being said, are all the students coming to class every day because they're like, oh, this new teacher is bringing in local Inuit content? No, that hasn't changed a lot of situations. But for my feeling, I feel it's important for students to be able to see themselves in the curricula.
So yeah, in addition to that, in addition to that, what are some unique challenges that you like that teaching in that environment that you would face? And also, what do you find particularly rewarding?
Well, one of the challenges of living and working in the North. I mean, I'm quite obviously a Southerner. I'm not from the North. I'm not Inuit. I don't have the background that they have, and I went to a good high school in Ottawa. I had two parents who were highly educated, had very good paying jobs. I had a very stable family situation, and I'm coming from a whole different world into this world, and so for me, it's a learning experience being here because there's so much that I don't know, and I need to be constantly reminded that these students are dealing with far more than this dumb assignment that I'm giving them. Not that it's a dumb assignment, but when I say, hey, how come you didn't do this work? I've got to realize that this student is living in a house of 12 people with 2 bedrooms. And they've got, their father has alcohol issues and their mother is, wandering around the community or is away for 2 weeks. There's so many issues. And I'm very thankful for my neighbor who's a science teacher, because whenever I want to talk about a student, I go over to her. She's been here for quite some time. And I say, what about this student? And she says, well, it's an amazing thing that student even gets to school. We should be giving these students awards just for showing up. So, I mean, I have a lot of students who come to school because it's a safe space. They don't come to school for learning. Learning, on the Maslow's pyramid, they are on the bottom. Learning is not a priority for them.
Yeah.
Getting out of their crazy house situation is a priority. And they're up all night because there's a party going on in their house. And so they come to my classroom and they put their head down and they sleep. And if I were in another classroom, or if you walked into my class on any day of the week, you would say, wait a second, why are there 3 people with their heads down and asleep? Like, what kind of teacher are you? And it drives me crazy. I'm like, well, what am I supposed to, should I go and wake them up and like, hey, what do get, focus on what I'm talking about? These are kids who've been up all night, for various reasons. Maybe they haven't even gone home. And this is their one safe space where they can just sleep. And so I continue my lesson, but I don't wake them up. I don't shake them. In fact, we were explicitly told at the beginning of the year, there's certain students, if you do try to wake them up, they will throw the desk at you. Like, they just let them sleep. Let them sleep. Okay.
So, what do you find rewarding about the teaching experience?
Well, I mean, challenges. I haven't finished the challenges, but I'll come back to rewards. I mean, we're teaching in a trauma-informed practice in theory. So in theory, we should be doing everything we're doing which should be trauma-informed, and we should always be keeping that in the back of our heads. overcrowded housing. There's nothing for teenagers to do here. So there's no outlet.
Yeah.
There's no shopping mall, there's no place for teenagers to go. Teenagers here do not do any homework at all, period. It's not like when I went to high school, oh yeah, we don't do homework. But here it's kind of a community-wide accepted thing. They don't do homework. And that's, wow, okay. So even if you apply it and so there's also, I touched on this earlier in terms of the residential school history, because of many of their parents or their grandparents went through the residential school, they don't necessarily trust the education system. They don't feel that these Southerners coming into their community are giving them what they need in terms of an education. And many of their parents had never graduated high school. One of the other challenges that I find in this community is that really you don't need more than a grade 10 education to get a job here. So what are we pushing these students for graduation if you can get your grade 10 education and get a fairly decent paying job? There's more and more, but I'll stop there. I'll go on to the rewards. So you said, what do I find rewarding?
Yeah, what do you find rewarding about teaching here?
Well, there's a number of levels. On a personal level, I feel that I feel like I'm learning so much here. And I feel like I'm gaining a lot, which is great. But that's not the purpose of why I'm here. Obviously, I'm here to give back to the community. And I think that, like I said, if I've had some, the occasional student who comes to school and just comes to my class and sleeps, and most people would find that insulting. But the fact that they actually come to my class means something to me. They don't have to. I mean, they could go off and sit in the, they could skip the class or they could not come to school, but they come to the school to be there. I've also had, there are those moments when you get through to a student, and you have to accept those amazing moments for what they are. Whereas in a school in the South, for example, if you had one student out of 35 do well in your class, you'd probably, you'd be called in by the principal and saying, what's going on here? Why is there only one student who's doing well in your class? Here, if you have one student doing well, like, hey, pat on the back, like that's one student who's gonna make it. Yeah.
It's funny. It's also funny when you say the South and everything. Like, you would consider the South being like Winnipeg, which is for us not at all the South.
Right.
Yeah. So just another question. What do you think the impact of the coronavirus outbreak is like on your community? Because obviously there are no cases, right? So, but how did it impact Baker Lake?
Well, it's a funny question because you're right. There are no cases of COVID-19 here at this point. There are no cases of it, and yet we are still in Canada and we're still living in a country that is affected by it. But we're living in this kind of bubble. Nobody here is wearing any masks. We have lots of toilet paper. We're okay in food departments, and the only thing we're not. The arena's not open. The school's not open. The daycare's not open. The gold mine that is right near our community isn't open. So we've got a lot of people in the community right now who are just kind of like not really. We're in a bubble. We're in a bubble here, and there are, as there are anywhere, there are mental health issues with people being kind of stuck in their homes all day. The kids are getting restless. The weather is getting nicer outside. The kids are getting restless, and they're looking for something to do. So that means they're either wandering around or causing trouble. I've heard that alcohol use has gone up significantly since the coronavirus hit, because just because people are at home and there's nothing to do. But it is a very different reality than what the rest of the country is going through, and what you, for example, are going through over there. A lot of the kids are they're getting jobs where they can. If there's a job to be had, they're out there earning some money, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I've had students come up to me and say, and these are students who never have never do any schoolwork at all, but they've come up to me and said, "Oh, I miss school. When are we going to go back at school? I miss school." And I'm like, "Oh, okay," but they don't miss studies; they just miss the atmosphere of school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think,
and the school.
Yeah,
The school in this community really, in the northern communities, it really has a central role as a safe place. It's a place that provides breakfast. It's a place that you can get a snack if you want. It's a place where you can talk to somebody and they'll listen to you. It's a place where you get away from your family. And I mean, that's a really important, and it's completely aside from the classes, completely aside from doing schoolwork. Whereas I think in many communities, like your own community, I think students miss school, but you can also go out to the park, or you can talk to your friends, or you can go hang out with people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, I think that's it's kind of similar to the whole to the fact that there's like a national curriculum, like you're using the Alberta curriculum, right? When instead you should be just focusing on your own society and your own culture. So maybe, so that sounds very similar to that, and how Baker Lake is being globalized and everything, when in turn it'd be much more beneficial for it to just focus on itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So okay,
Absolutely.
my last question would be, what do you think is the importance of an education in Baker Lake?
Well, this is something I've been struggling with, especially now with this COVID-19. I've been struggling with this concept and this question, because really what most students here want, and I think what the community wants, is to go out on the land. Many of the cultural skills that the Inuit had were lost or were taken away from them because of the residential school program, because the Canadian government said, we don't want you to practice your culture anymore, we don't want you to speak your language anymore. And so the students here, most of them don't speak Inuktitut. Their grandparents do. I have some students who live with grandparents who don't speak English. Their grandparents speak only Inuktitut, and they can't speak to their own grandparents in their own language. And so that part of culture is really lost. Students here don't know how to make a kayak. They don't know how to build an igloo. They might have done it once in a cultural lesson that they did 10 years ago, but they've lost those survival skills. I can't teach those skills. That's not what I'm here for. I'm not here to teach local Inuit skills. I think we should be bringing more elders into the classroom. I think we should have the students more on the land, learning from elders. I think they should be learning in their language. I think primarily the studies should be done in Inuktitut. And I think us Southerners should be using Inuktitut more. We should be trained in Inuktitut. We should be using Inuktitut whenever we can. So the question is how I feel about the importance of education in Baker Lake. And I think it's kind of a loaded question, because I feel it is important to know how to read and write. Absolutely. I feel it's important to know numbers and numeracy and to know how to use mathematical skills. Absolutely. Do I feel like calculus is important in Baker Lake? No. Do I feel like reading Shakespeare is important in Baker Lake? No. Do I feel like the students need to know how to do a research paper? No. There are a few students who are going to go on to post-secondary education, and they need those skills. But we almost need two separate education systems here. We need an education system for those who want to maybe get jobs outside of Baker Lake, those who want to go on to post-secondary education, those who want to, develop their southern intellectual skills. And then we need a separate education system for those who really just need the basics. They're never going to write a 10-page paper. They need to know how to write, a very basic, they need to know the basic structures of writing. They don't need to know how to conduct, research on the internet. It's not something that they're really, that skill is going to use. And I have a student, she was 25 years old when she just graduated. 25 years old. She's one of the best hunters in the community. She can go out on the land, take 3 caribou, skin them, cut them, butcher down the meat, and bring it back, and give back to her community. And yet she's really struggling in reading and writing. Does she need her reading and writing? Does she know how to? Does she know how to basically read? Yeah. Is that enough for her? Probably. And it sounds almost like I'm giving up on her. It sounds like, I wish she could, why can't she read a book, full book? That's not her thing. But what we're offering is kind of like we're a restaurant, right? And we're a French food restaurant. We're serving French food. And people are coming to the French food restaurant and saying, well, can you make sushi? And we're like, no, we don't sell sushi. We sell French food. Our education model that we're using is very limited. And it's very frustrating for me because this is the model I'm trained in. This is the model that I'm supposed to be pushing on the students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds, and once again, it also sounds similar to the whole coronavirus pandemic and how they're sort of pushing those regulations on you guys when, in fact, there are no cases and hasn't really affected you, and so all it's doing is just negatively affecting Baker Lake.
And a lot of people have said, well, why cancel school here if there's no cases here? Mm-hmm. And it's one of these back and forths that, well, if we open school and then there is a case, then everyone will blame the school for, why were you opening and letting the students interact with each other when, everybody knows there's this COVID situation. Then you could go back, and if there's no cases, if everything's good for months and months and months, then everyone says, oh, you were right. We didn't have any cases, so we could have opened school. But the schools are so careful about this, and the schools are so worried about being blamed. Mm-hmm. Even if one case comes up in the school, and then everybody else gets it, then the community is going to turn on the school and say, what a stupid thing it was to open the school. And you're right. I mean, we're in this kind of limbo stage of we have to follow the rules of the country, but we also are in our own bubble that we don't have any COVID cases here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what does this mean? Well, it means that human struggle is universal. And there are millions of kids right now that are trapped in this sea of bureaucracy and globalism, and an education system that is failing them. And while their struggle may be inexorable, it is not inevitable. We can make a difference. This is not about international struggle or crisis or even a global pandemic. This is about children. This is about our future. Education is about inspiration and understanding the beauty of our own lives. And we need to appreciate that, and we need to help inspire others. People say that we're all humans and we're all the same, but that's just not true. We're different. We're very different. And we have to embrace that.